gotta look at this so the next time I do it, I remember the jokes. Anyway, thank you for coming. We'll start in a minute, and good to see live people. Yeah, I sit in front of my screen, and I mean, I have no problems with it because I do stuff in San Francisco, and Denver, Detroit, Chicago, Florida, and you know, it's like I just walk from my bedroom to there, 6.5 feet, and don't have to go anything. But it's good to be back in front of a live crowd, even if I have to wear my shells.
Don't be so sure we're alive.
They're a live crowd, so we'll start in a minute. When the clock on the wall hits 2, we'll start. Sounds like a Groucho Marx type, doesn't it? You know, if you ever wore duck soup, ever watched Duck Soup, His Excellency will arrive when the clock strikes 11. So we got, according to that clock, we got 10 seconds before it strikes 2. So everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, even though the mask, and with the mask it's going to become a little gnarly in about 45 minutes, but that's okay. You want to start?
Yes.
Okay. All right, my name is Evan Weiner. I haven't been here in a while, and it's good to see everybody. And I'm going to take you back in time, a little bit back in time, 46 years ago. 1975, which was the start of the disco era, and we should have lights going back and forth, and balls going around, and music, boom, 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 or, well, I'll talk more about it later. But 1975 was an interesting year. I was 19 years old, and I didn't have to worry about being drafted. Vietnam was over by 2 years, by this point. It's the fall of Saigon. Gerald Ford survived 2 assassination attempts. New York, hey, Gerald Ford to New York City, dropped dead. That's a famous newspaper headline. Ford to city, dropped dead. New York was going bankrupt. Israel and Egypt get some peace, although, as you know, today that continues with what's going on with Israel and Gaza. Francisco Franco died, the Spanish dictator who became a long-running joke on the new show that started that year called Saturday Night Live. The Helsinki Accords officially end World War II in Europe. 30 years later, World War II is over. The United States and the Soviet Union, they have the Soyuz Apollo spacecrafts dock. Cooperation in space between the 2 countries. Do you know who that guy on the right is? You have any idea who that guy on the right is?
Gates.
That's Bill Gates. He's 19 years old. That's Paul Allen with him. And you know what company they formed in 1975? Microsoft. How many of you can live without Microsoft today? Can anybody live without Microsoft today? Or Apple? Anyway, April 4th, 1975, that thing starts. Oh, remember her, Patty Hearst?
Yeah.
She was arrested. Remember Sin-Q and the Symbionese Liberation Army? Well, she's arrested in 1975 on September 18th, 1975. Jimmy Hoffa disappears. I don't know what ever happened to him. He just disappeared. Just disappeared. Jimmy Hoffa. And how many of you saw Jaws? Patty was telling me that movie scared her. Ask her about it, she'll tell you about it. Jaws. And I put my head in Jaws in Universal lot in Hollywood. I have it hanging like that. You put your head right in there. Jaws. The terrifying motion picture from the terrifying #1 bestseller, Jaws, out on Long Island. And, you know, they were messing around with TV again. And Archie and Edith and Meathead and little girl, Gloria, did a little parody, which I can't show today because there's copyright laws about it, but I can tell you about it. In disco, how many of you went to disco places?
Yeah.
You went to disco places. Did you like it?
Yes.
Why'd you love it?
It was exciting.
It's exciting. I hated it.
Really?
I hated it. I didn't particularly like it all that much because, you know, I was used to I bet you can't tell this. Talking? I bet you probably could never figure this out. I mean, I was one of these people in the corner who would sit there all night telling stories, even though I was 19, and I didn't have that many stories. But I could sit there and tell stories, and everybody else would be up in the dance floor, and all the lights would be going here and there, and the disco era started, complete with hot pants. These are hot pants. How many of you owned hot pants?
Yeah,
You owned hot
of
pants.
course.
Ronnie owned hot
Oh,
pants.
yes,
You had the hot pants.
absolutely.
You have the roller skates. The roller skates too.
Yeah.
The roller skates too. So there are the hot pants. So anyway, the disco era starts. And Margaret Thatcher ascends in England, and eventually she would be the first woman prime minister in England. But let's say goodbye to Vietnam. And I miss Vietnam because I graduated high school in 1973, but I would have, under normal circumstances, in 1974. But the war is over, and it really doesn't impact me. But the war ends in 1973, and yet the United States is still in Vietnam, at least with advisors. They're not fighting anymore because the United States did bring North Vietnam to its knees in 1973 after bombing during Christmas. And they get peace, and troops are gone. But troops are gone doesn't mean the North Vietnamese are gone. They're still fighting with the South Vietnamese, and by 1975 it's all over. The war comes to an end at the end of April. There was a series of events that would lead to the fall of Saigon, which is now called Ho Chi Minh City. The North Vietnamese army began an aggressive campaign against South Vietnam in April. North Vietnam took Saigon, and the Vietnamese president, Tran, realizes, hey, we can't defend ourselves anymore, that's it. He resigns, and South Vietnam surrenders unconditionally to the North. Now, how many of you were involved with 1960s movements, peace movements, or pro-war or anything? Anybody involved? You don't have to tell me what side you were on, just you were involved. This thing started in 1954 when the French pull out of Indochina, splits in half. North Vietnam goes communist, South Vietnam is propped up by the Americans, simply because the Americans didn't want to see South Vietnam fall to the communists or Laos or other countries. The United States involvement in the war ends on April 30th after 2 decades, with helicopters taking off from the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. We send troops to Vietnam, we being the United States. Eisenhower authorizes in 1960 about 3,000 troops. Kennedy escalates it, even though before his death he was thinking, what are we doing here? But he didn't do anything to stop what are we doing here. And then, of course, Johnson and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which gave him the power to go after the North Vietnamese. And then Nixon finally ends the war in 1973. There was this thing called the Domino Theory in the 1950s, and it went something like this. If China is of course communist, North Korea is of course communist, but if other countries, if we don't help them out, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Burma, India, could all fall, all to communism. Oddly enough, in 1961, Eisenhower, right before he leaves office, tells Kennedy the real problem is Laos, not Vietnam. But as history points out, Vietnam was the problem. The communist takeover of Vietnam. When did the Domino Theory come to be in 1975? Because South Vietnam falls, Laos falls, Cambodia falls. The Pathat Lao people overthrew the royalist government, forcing the king to abdicate in Laos. Despite massive American bombing against the Khmer Rouge throughout the Cambodian Civil War, the Khmer Rouge is victorious. America seized the Domino Theory, but the funny thing is now, Vietnam, I speak on cruise ships, Vietnam's one of the most popular destinations for people on cruise ships. Americans on cruise ships now. Go figure that. Gerald Ford had an interesting couple weeks. Remember Lynn Squeaky Fromm? Remember her? She was one of the Manson disciples. She'd do anything for Charles Manson. And here she is after she attempts to kill Gerald Ford. It's in Sacramento. Ford has a one-day visit to Sacramento where he's going to meet with the governor, Jerry Brown. Remember, speaking of disco eras, Governor Jerry Brown, moonbeams and all that other stuff, and he dated Linda Ronstadt. That would go on a little after this. And then he's giving a speech to the California legislature. Somehow, Squeaky Fromm is able to confront Ford in Sacramento's Capitol Park. She's in a red robe and she has a gun. And she says, I want to talk to Ford about the plight of the California redwoods. And she gets really close. Extremely close. There she is after she's pinned down. Secret Service agent wrestled a semi-automatic .45 caliber pistol from Squeaky Fromm, who brandished the weapon during a public appearance by Ford in Sacramento. She was a follower of Charles Manson, who at this point was in jail. She pointed the loaded gun at the president. Secret Service grabbed it. Now, it was loaded, but was it in the chamber? That was the question. Fromm was immediately restrained. The pistol had been loaded with 4 rounds, but she didn't have ammunition in the chamber. The gun never went off. She's arrested. Assassination attempt number 1, that's September 5th, 1975. And there is Charles Manson. Of course, he led the group that killed Sharon Tate, the LeBlancas, back in 1969. He's in jail, but she spent time with Charles Manson back then. Fromm pleaded not guilty to the attempted assassination of the president. She said that even though the gun had bullets in it, it had not been cocked. Therefore, she did not intend to shoot the president. She was convicted, sentenced to life in prison in the Alderson Federal Correction Institute in West Virginia. She was released on parole in August of 2009 after 35 years. And she goes on TV 2 years ago. She's talking about this. She's still alive. And she's asked about Charles Manson. And whoever's doing the interview says, "Are you in love with Charlie?" Her answer, "Yeah, I still am." The second assassination attempt, 17 days later, a woman by the name of Sarah Jane Moore, who seemingly, it's hard to tell whether she was had mental problems, or what exactly what was she doing. She was an activist during those days. There, Ford is being whisked away. Again, it's in California. It's in San Francisco's Union Square Hotel Post Street entrance. He's addressing the World Affairs Council audience. He pauses before he gets in the limousine to wave to the crowd across the street. And Sarah Jane Moore is waiting for him. In a flash, 2 shots ring out. One narrowly missed him. The second was deflected by a bystander who grabbed the arm of the shooter, who was a middle-class housewife, and she also was dabbling in extreme politics, and she also had been an FBI informant named Sarah Jane Moore. What was her beef? Well, it's hard to tell exactly. She was paroled in 2007. She had spent 32 years in jail, and she told the Today program on NBC, it was a time that people don't remember. You know, we had a war, Vietnam War, I became immersed in it. We were saying the country needed to change, and the only way it was going to change was violent revolution. I genuinely thought that shooting Ford might trigger a new revolution in the country. So she was bouncing back and forth, an FBI informant, protester. Even she admitted she didn't know what exactly she was doing. Meanwhile, Ford reflected on it in a 2004 interview. He talked about Sarah Jane Moore, he talked about Squeaky Fromm, and he said, well, I guess these people who do attempt assassinations are unusual. Squeaky Fromm certainly was off her mind. Sarah Jane Moore the same way. How many love going to New York or love hanging out in Manhattan? How many of you used to go to Manhattan and just hang out in Manhattan, which I'm going to do tomorrow? That's Abe Beame. Abe Beame, the mayor of New York City, showing off that famous Daily News headline, Ford to City, drop dead. I love New York? No. New York City's finances were a mess, absolute a mess. The city tried to maintain its extensive local welfare state, and there was a recession of the early 1970s, which is what got Nixon to look at how am I going to get after the Democratic opponents. I have a recession to deal with. I know we'll dig dirt up on Edmund Muskie or break into Watergate. That was part of it, the recession. There was middle-class flight. Industrial decline and middle-class flight, although that had started back with the opening of the Tappan Zee Bridge in 1959 to Rockland, although east when Levittown was put up after the war. So that was nothing new. On October 17, 1975, New York City almost went bankrupt. The city tried to borrow, but the bank said, we're not going to give you any more money. The mayor, Abe Beame, the governor, Hugh Carey, who in my early days on radio or during radio news, I used to interview an awful lot, Hugh Carey. I never met Beame. Appealed to Washington, D.C. You know, they said, hey, look, you bail out corporations all the time. You just bail them out. You just throw money. Remember, at this point, the automobile industry is about ready to teeter over. It would be in 1979 that Congress would bail out Chrysler. Anyway, after all, ailing corporations, you're getting government handouts. Why should New Yorkers be made to suffer from problems that were a result of economic forces beyond the city's control? Gerald Ford didn't want to hear anything about it. Carey goes before Congress, complaining or begging for money. There were hardliners in the Ford administration against New York. One was Donald Rumsfeld, who you might know. The other, Ellen Greenspan, the husband of Andrea Mitchell over at NBC TV. And they insisted, hey, the city's problems, they're your problems, not the problems of the United States. New York's default, according to Greenspan, would not have any significant economic impact. There's no shortcut to fiscal responsibility. Greenspan, then the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, wrote in a memo, Helmut Schmidt to the rescue? Helmut Schmidt? Guy running West Germany? What is a guy running West Germany? How's he come to the rescue? And he does, because he begins to tell Americans, hey, wait a minute, you're only 4% of the world. That's all you are. You're only 4% of the world. Business leaders, bankers testified in Congress. New York goes bankrupt, it's a total disaster. Total disaster for all of us. Helmut Schmidt warned that New York's default would have global repercussions. In the end, Ford doesn't tell New York City to drop dead. He supports legislation that extended loans to New York City. Meanwhile, the city fires thousands of police officers, firefighters, teachers, and other public workers to get the house in order. As you know, as we're speaking here, there is a major problem between Gaza and the Israelis as we're speaking today. 1975, it was no different. There were major problems in the Middle East. The Israel-Egypt Accords, which grew out of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. In March of 75, Henry Kissinger, I once met in an elevator at Yankee Stadium, and he told me this. We got to this conversation. I said, what's your biggest regret in your life? He said, never becoming the commissioner of the North American Soccer League. I said, what? He said, yeah, we would have made the North American Soccer League work, but they never hired me. That was his biggest regret. His biggest regret. Anyway, Kissinger begins another round of shuffle diplomacy, remember the shuttle diplomacy, aimed at disengagement in Sinai. Yitzhak Rabin was reluctant to give up any territory in Sinai, but Kissinger and Ford applied some pressure on the Israelis by saying, hey, you want arms? You listen to us. We're the ones who are supplying you. And eventually he caved in to the demands. After meetings in Washington and in Israel were being agreed to negotiations in August, on September 4th, a deal's cut. Israel would withdraw from the Abu Radiz oil fields and the Mitla and Gadi passes, as well as the creation of a UN-monitored buffer zone. The UN had been involved in the Mideast after the 56 problems through 1967, when Egypt expelled the UN monitors. No PLO though. We don't want any part of Yasser Arafat. We want no part of it at all. By the way, I never met Arafat, but my friend Bob Friedman, who's a teacher at Johns Hopkins University, has written a lot of books about the Middle East. His name, F-R-E-E-D-M-A-N, if you're interested. Bob Friedman, Robert Friedman, told me he's in Tunis one year, Tunis. And he says that he's meeting with Arafat because he's working as an advisor for somebody. He says Arafat walks in 3 hours late. And he says, Friedman, right? He said, yeah. He said, the kosher food's over there. We got it for you. We took care of all that. And Bob Friedman says to him, I didn't like your speech today. He says, forget about my speech. It's only for their consumption. What do you need to talk to me about? And that was Bob Friedman's initial meeting with Yasser Arafat back in the 1980s. Anyway, Israel made clear, we want no part of the Palestinians, nothing at all. And in persuading Israel to sign a second disengagement agreement with Egypt, Kissinger promised not to negotiate with the PLO, Yasser Arafat's people, until it recognized Israel and accepted the legitimacy of the UN Security Council Resolution 242 and renounced the use of terrorism. And where are we today on May 14th, 2021? This has not been resolved. Franco dies. Do you know that in 1961, that Franco, who was the dictator in Spain, gave women equal rights in employment, that women and men in the same job had to be paid the same amount of money? That's Franco did that in 1961. He realized the value of women. In 1950, when Edith Green was elected to Congress in 1954, 1955, she proposed in a law that women and men get equal salaries for equal jobs. Edith Green was from Oregon. In 1963, it was kind of signed into law, but was never enforced. Franco did that in 1961. Not that he was a good guy. He was terrible. He was an awful guy. And he was also the punchline to a script for a new TV show that year called Saturday Night Live, which is still on. He dies at the age of 82 in November. He had taken over as Spain's head of state in 1939 after his national forces defeated the Republic forces, and Franco puts fascism into Spain. He had harsh political oppression, but as he aged, like 1961 with women, he had more progressive ideas and reforms were allowed. During World War II, he kept out of World War II. He was kind of aligned with Hitler and Mussolini, but minimally. After his death, the monarchy was restored and King Juan Carlos took power. As per Franco's instructions, democracy was established soon after his death. Remember Saturday Night Live? Remember Chevy Chase? He did the weekend update, right? This was the running joke. Franco is still dead. Franco is still dead. Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead. Catchphrase originated in 1975 during the first season of NBC's Saturday Night, which was renamed Saturday Night Live. And it mocked the weeks-long media reports of the impending death of Francisco Franco. Saturday Night Live debuted on October 11th, 1975. I haven't watched it in years and years and years and years. I haven't watched it. But it's still on. One of the reasons it's on is on Saturday night at 11:30 Eastern Time. It's dead time on TV. So NBC said, you know, what do we got to lose? They threw it on, made a lot of money, shows quality has been like that over the years, but it makes money. So that's why it's still on. The Helsinki Accords. Gerald Ford, look at Leonid Brezhnev from the Soviet Union. He's actually animated. Somebody give him some vodka? Anyway, this officially ends World War II. World War II officially ends here. The United States, Canada, European countries, and the Soviets meet to sign the Helsinki Accords, which set forth rules of international conduct, including human rights. The Accords were an effort to tamp down tensions between the Soviets and the West. Of course, it's still the Cold War. And the Soviets lost an ally in China way back when, so they're going without China, because Mao Zedong didn't particularly like Nikita Khrushchev back around 1958. So it's just the Soviets against the West at this point, reaffirming post-World War II orders, fostering cooperation on arms control, science, trade, and other issues. That détente wouldn't last long. The Western nations secured the Soviet commitment to both nuclear de-escalation and a series of foundational human rights precepts, which didn't happen in the Soviet Union, didn't happen at all. These included freedom of movement, freedom of ideas, conformity with the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which declared freedom of expression, religion, and association to be universal rights, which the Soviets decided they didn't have to really adhere to. But it was a time of US-USSR cooperation, at least in space. Now, if you know anything about the Cold War and you know about the race to the moon was really part of the Cold War. John Kennedy committed Americans to go to the moon and didn't care about the space program. The only thing he cared about was the Americans would land on the moon before the Soviets did to give them a win in the Cold War. Kennedy also talked about the missile crisis running for president in 1960, or the missile gap, and there was no missile gap, but Kennedy sold it anyway. And there's the guy up there, Tom Stafford, is one of the two astronauts I've interviewed. The other was Buzz Aldrin. Stafford was a general, and he was kind of quiet, didn't have much to say. Aldrin lived up to the nickname Buzz. He was all over the place. Last time I saw, remember Georgie Jessel?
Yeah.
Remember Georgie Jessel used to have all the medals and all that
Yes.
other stuff? The last time I saw Buzz Aldrin, which was about 10 years ago, I looked at him and I said, Georgie Jessel back to life. He looked just like Georgie Jessel. Anyway, there are the American astronauts and there are the cosmonauts from the USSR. The July mission objective was to dock an Apollo module with the Soviets' Soyuz 19. It was the final space flight for Apollo. Why? Well, the final space flight was supposed to be to the moon, but Congress backed off and didn't fund going to the moon for Apollo 18, 19, and 20, and they had the spacecraft around, so hey, let's use it. So they did. The two spacecrafts were launched on the same day. The Soviet mission returned to Earth. After almost 6 days in space, the Apollo mission lasted 9 days, and there's now an International Space Station and all that other stuff. And in space exploration, it's more of a public-private partnership that's beginning to evolve in the United States. Cold War implications. Cold War. That was Harry Truman, called it the Cold War. And it was a Cold War in a lot of ways, although there were proxy wars that were fought in places like Angola, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Soviets are trying to get a leg up on the Americans a leg up on the Soviets. The docking was considered successful. The two crews performed several experiments together. It was the first of many collaborations between the Soviets and the Americans in space. And at that time, it seemed to be, hey, it's cool, you know? Soviets are sending hockey teams to North America to compete, and it looks like there's some sort of détente possible. And they thought at that time there might be a softening of the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. Hey, they still were sending those dancing bears from the Moscow circus I loved when I was a kid. Watching Sullivan, that came out in 1958. Hey, you know all about Brexit now, right? Yeah, the English, they want to get out of the European Union. Well, they kind of weren't invited into the European Union at first. They were in 1973. By 1975, the United Kingdom held its first ever national referendum on whether the UK should remain in the European Economic Committee. Britain joined the EU in 1973, and you've heard all about the problems with Britain and the EU, and finally a vote called Brexit, and they're still trying to negotiate to get out. On June 5th, the English electorate was asked, you're going to vote yes or no on this question. Do you think the UK should stay in the European community, the common market? Every administrative county and region in the UK returned the majority yes votes. It's no today. No today. Then there's the Angolan Civil War. How many of you realize that this thing went on for 27 years? That Fidel Castro sent troops into Angola. That it was the Soviets and the Americans fighting a war without being involved in a war. The war begins in November of 1975. Angola becomes independent from Portugal. There's a power struggle between the two forming anti-colonial guerrilla movements, the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, and the Anti-Communist National Union for the total independence of Angola. Guess what side the United States was on? Guess what side the Soviets were on? And the Chinese, and the Cubans, and the Europeans. That war would go on for 27 years. All right, let's talk about this. How many of you have computers? How many? What would your lives be without computers? If you had no computers, what would your life be? What would you be doing? Be reading books, maybe? Maybe reading books? I don't know, maybe reading a newspaper or a magazine. By the way, newspapers are gone, magazines are gone, books are going, they're all online. And these two guys have a lot to do with it. And on April 4th, 1975, you were probably going about your business, having no idea about the world about ready to change on that day and to impact your lives, the rest of your lives, my grandkids' lives. And there they are. Bill Gates drops out of Harvard. He's 19 years old. Of course, he just got divorced, right? And the late Paul Allen. And these two guys, two nerds, decide, hey, let's start a company together. We're in 2021. That company is what? The most valuable in the world, or one of the most valuable companies in the world. So here it is. It's April 4th, 1975. And Bill Gates and Paul Allen said, let's go into business. And we do. They started a company called Microsoft. And it's called Microsoft, not the way it's spelled today, but MICRO-SOFT, for microprocessors and software in order to produce software for the Altair 8080, an early personal computer. Now these guys decide, hey, you know what? Let's put everything on the line. They're young guys. They're really young guys. Allen quits his job as a computer programmer in Boston. And Gates, I'm done with Harvard University. You know what they say about college dropouts? Go back to school. You need the diploma, go back to school. Hey Bill, you listening to me? Go back to Harvard. You need a job, don't you? Anyway, Gates leaves, and where he was a student, and they focus on this new company, which is based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, because the city was home to an electronics firm called MITS, the makers of the Altair 880, 8800, 8800. The rest, of course, is history. How many of you have Windows programming in your computers? You probably do. You know how much money you've given to these guys over the years? These guys have tons of money. Paul Allen ended up with all of Jimi Hendrix's old guitars and stuff like that. I was in Seattle. My daughter lives in Seattle. And there's an old movie theater out in the middle of nowhere, near downtown Seattle. And Paul Allen used to go to it as a kid. And they were going to condemn the movie theater, build something else there. And he says, no, he buys the movie theater because he used to go there as a kid and he could do so. It's good to be the king, isn't it? Good to be the king. Okay, how many of you remember Patty Hearst? Remember Patty Hearst, right?
Yeah.
How many of you were glued to the TV, wondering about Sin-Q and the Symbionese Liberation Army and how they kidnapped poor Patty Hearst? And Patty Hearst was this kidnapper who became Tanya. Remember, she became Tanya, and it's like every day you'd watch the news, what's Tanya doing today? And she would do these messages, and she'd have that Symbionese Liberation Army logo behind her, and there she is, robbing a bank. She was a newspaper heiress, William Randolph Hearst, granddaughter. William Randolph Hearst was no day at the beach either. In fact, he's one of the people who helped cause the Spanish-American War in 1898. Yellow journalism came out of William Randolph Hearst, partly because of a cartoon, The Yellow Kid, partly because of his anti-Asian sentiment in his San Francisco newspaper. He was also the model for Citizen Kane. Remember Citizen Kane? The Orson Welles movie? And when that movie came out, Hearst in his newspaper said, we are not going to give that movie any publicity, none whatsoever. And Hearst actually threatened theater owners, if you play that movie, we're going to take care of you. So that movie had a rocky start to it, and that was her grandfather. She was kidnapped on February 4th, 1974. And in April of 1974, 2 months into the kidnapping, she sent letters to the media saying that I'm joining the Symbionese Liberation Army. And she becomes a national soap opera after that. And she's doing it on her own free will. Later that month, a surveillance camera took a photo of her participating in an armed robbery of a San Francisco bank, and that made her one of the FBI's most wanted criminals. Following her capture by the FBI, she goes on trial for her crimes, and she's found guilty, and she's sent to prison for 7 years. She would serve 2 years, and then be pardoned by Bill Clinton back in the 1990s, early 2000s. She's led a fairly quiet life after that, but she was all over the place, if you remember.
She's still around?
Yeah, she's still around.
What is she doing for?
She's got money.
That's
She has money. You ever go to San Simeon?
Mm-hmm.
The castle up in San Simeon? For those of you who don't know, San Simeon is kind of in between LA and San Francisco, and that was the place that William Randolph Hearst used to stash Marion Davies, his mistress, who got into movies because of William Randolph Hearst. And so yeah, she has money. She has money. Lots of money. So but she's still alive. Jimmy Hoffa. Remember Jimmy Hoffa?
Yeah.
Jimmy Hoffa was the head of the Teamsters. And Jimmy Hoffa had an interesting relationship with the Kennedys. Bobby Kennedy wanted to put him away, if you remember, for all kind of corruption and all that other stuff. Jimmy Hoffa was a powerful union figure, 50s, 60s, into the 70s. And he's gone out for a meal one day in suburban Detroit. He was the president of the powerful Teamsters Union from 1957 until imprisonment for conspiracy and fraud in the late 1960s. He gets out, and he's back to doing what he was doing. He goes missing in July of 1975 and was legally declared dead 7 years later. What happened? There have been all kind of TV shows. What happened? Where is he buried? What happened to him? Did he get chopped up to bits? What happened? What happened? What happened? Well, he decides he's going to go to this place. This is where he's last seen. It's the Fox restaurant outside of Detroit. He left his Detroit area home, and he was going to meet with a local crime figure and a mob-connected union leader from New Jersey at a restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. The get-together was one of these, you gotta settle this feud, because this feud's no good for our business, because if it was any good for our business, but we gotta settle this feud between you two. But those guys, D-O-S-E, those as in those guys, never showed up. Hoffa does show up. And then, what happens to Jimmy Hoffa after that? Well, nobody seems to know. His car was found in the restaurant parking lot. But where did he go? Where did he go? Nobody seems to know. After 7 years, he doesn't turn up. Doesn't pay the bill either, probably. And he's gone. He's gone. He's declared legally dead. That's the New Jersey Meadowlands. And I decided that's where the rumors were that he was buried, right there. So I decided to take a picture there one day, saying, looking around, looking for clues to find Jimmy Hoffa, because he was allegedly supposed to be buried right there in the end zone at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. But when they leveled the place to build a new place, they didn't find Jimmy Hoffa either, so I don't know what happened to him. How many of you saw this movie? How many of you saw this movie? Jaws. Did you like it?
No, I never saw it.
You never saw it? Did you like it? No, you didn't. Why didn't you like it? Too boring?
Never saw it.
You never saw it, but you saw it, right? You saw it? What'd you think?
Scary.
Scary. It's supposed to be. It was supposed to be. It's about, a shark that's hungry. And you shouldn't go near sharks that are hungry when you're swimming, right?
Right.
Shouldn't be doing that. Jaws was released in 1975. Before that, you had movies, Gone with the Wind, all that other stuff, but they were never considered blockbuster movies. The term didn't exist. Blockbuster movies. Blockbuster movies became Blockbuster Video eventually. Remember when Hazenga owned Blockbuster Video? How many of you got videos from Blockbuster? And where's Blockbuster today? It's not around anymore. Okay, so it's one of the first films that was a blockbuster film. At the time of its release, it was the highest grossing film of all time. The film was directed by Steven Spielberg, who was rather young at that time, and starred Richard Dreyfuss and Roy Schneider and Robert Shore. And there they are, working on the movie. The plot revolved around some killer shark that was terrorizing a small town and those who wanted to hunt it. It was nominated for several Academy Awards, won 3 of them. Known for its dramatic score by John Williams. Heard of John Williams? John Williams is a great composer. I saw him in Tanglewood.
Awesome.
Yeah, I saw him in Tanglewood 2 years ago. He was really good, really good. He was doing Star Wars. Remember Star Wars? That was a Saturday night bit. Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. Bill Murray. Anyway, it had superior ending, a suspenseful premise. It's considered to be, from the critics, one of the greatest films ever made. And there's Steven Spielberg, about ready to get eaten up. I actually have a picture of that too. Not in the water, but I have my head at Universal under, I gotta put that in there. Under I had my head and the sharks got ready to eat me. So it was only a movie. The family viewing hour. How many of you watched this show? Did you like it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you liked it? Yeah, it was on Saturday nights at 8 o'clock. Mary Tyler Moore was also on, and others that night. That was CBS's biggest night of all time, Saturday night. Anyway, 1975, this show gets moved from Saturday at 8 o'clock to Monday night at 9 o'clock, going against Monday Night Football, which is generally the death knell of a show, or back then. And it was moved for political purposes. Remember, Archie was the blowhard meathead. Michael Stivic was his liberal son-in-law, and Edith was dingbat, and Gloria was little girl, remember, of the show. It was called the Family Viewing Hour. And the Family Viewing Hour was a policy established by the Federal Communications Commission in 1975. Under the policy, each network, which is ABC, NBC, or CBS, remember Happy Days was on at 8 o'clock, had the responsibility to air family-friendly programming during the first hour of prime time, 3 hours of prime time, 8 o'clock to 11 Eastern, 7 to 10 Central, and on the West Coast, 8 to 10. And so All in the Family, which was quite popular and quite controversial, was on Saturday nights at 8 o'clock. That couldn't be under this. NBC, the problem starts with NBC. In 1974, there was a television scene that caused a particularly strong backlash. It was a movie called Born Innocent on NBC and featured a lesbian rape scene. The scene drew a lot of outcry with its first airing and was blamed for a real-life rape of a young girl, which led the case to go before the California Supreme Court. And there were a lot of lawsuits around this one. In January 1975, the FCC chairman, Richard Wiley, addressed the Senate and House Communications and Commerce subcommittees, stating that all three networks agreed to adopt the Family Viewing Hour in response to the criticism. Now, let me ask you a question about All in the Family. Was All in the Family friendly to a family? Yes or no? Or were they taking on life issues that families couldn't handle? If you watch All in the Family, remember they took on a myriad of issues. There was no violence in All in the Family, was there? No violence. There was no nudity. It was just issues of the day, right?
No, racial.
Yeah.
Yeah, issues of the day. Some of them still have not been resolved. I mean, so you put remember the Waltons were on, so you could have them, they're okay at 8 o'clock. But All in the Family, the producer and writer, Norman Lear, was incensed. The National Association of Broadcasters took the gesture one step further, and local stations had to air family-friendly programming 7 p.m. time slot. That was a time that the networks were forbidden from programming under the primetime access rule. And I'm not going to get into the inertia of what a network is, what syndication is, and all that, because we'll be here for the next 3 days me explaining that. But it's a little different. We'll just leave it at primetime. And thus, it was up to individual stations to program whatever they wanted, which is why you got to see games like The Price is Right at night, the Match Game, because they were family friendly, right? So you had all these shows that ended up at that time. Norman Lear objects, absolutely objects, because he's got Maude, he's got All in the Family, he's got the Jeffersons, he's got the Jimmy Walker show, Dynamite, Good Times. He's got all these shows on, One Day at a Time with Bonnie Franklin, and all of them dealt with adult subjects. And he can't get his shows on at 8 o'clock anymore. All in the Family was the runaway top show since 1971. And it goes, after 5 years, to Monday nights at 9 o'clock, up against Monday Night Football. And Helen Cosell, whose grandson Justin lives down the street from you, who I know rather well. Anyway, I was friendly with Cosell and still friendly with the Cosell family. Anyway, it was moved, and Norman Lear says, hey, wait a minute. What are you trying to do here? This is an infringement on my creative freedom and my First Rights Amendment. So he files a lawsuit, and he gets support from the Writers Guild and others, and he would win the case. It was ruled unconstitutional, totally unconstitutional. Why are you just moving these shows at random and where they were? And All in the Family never recovers from it. Never recovers from it. On November 4th, 1976, the United States District Court Judge Warren J. Ferguson declared family viewing hour unconstitutional. Now, the problem, of course, here is that the government regulates the networks, regulates television station licenses, and regulates radio station licenses. Cable TV is a whole different deal entirely. Hey, how many of you watch stuff on demand or watch stuff on tape? Because starting in 1975, you were able, or you could have been able, to tape everything that was on TV, if you had a lot of money. Betamax, Sony presents the next thing. Watch whatever, whenever. Tape your TV shows. Sony introduces Betamax videotapes. Matsushita JVC introduces the VHS. How many of us lived with VHSs for that brief time? In our case, 1985 to about 2003. 18 years came and went. Sony released the Betamax video cassette recording system for sale in Japan. System retailed for several $1,000s. You can get VHS now for about $49. Other companies also began selling their systems using a different format. VHS, home video system. Okay, I got my beads on here, right? Got my puka shells. See my puka shells? My puka shells. She wanted me to put the puka shells on. Got my wife's hot pants. Got my wife's hot pants. How many of you had hot pants? You had hot pants, right? You had hot pants. Like this? Similar? Similar. Anybody else have hot pants? No? No? And shells, right? Do the hustle. How many of you did the hustle? I never did. I refused to. Stood my ground. I said, I'm not any part of this. There were a lot of people who passed me by. Too busy writing or whatever. Too busy in the corner talking. Impressing people by my wit. Or witlessness. Anyway, do the hustle! So you did the hustle, right? How'd you do the hustle?
I forget. Yes.
Forget.
I did.
Was it something like this?
Yeah.
Or whatever it was, do the hustle. Although, dance music comes back after the British invasion, there wasn't that much dance music. Do the hustle. During the summer, a guy by the name of Van LaCoy, The Hustle was the #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 and Hot Soul Singles. The song took disco and turned it into a cultural phenomenon. Variations like the Latin, the Line, the New York Hustles popped up on dance floors nationally. I never went to those dance floors. I was in the corner talking. Remember her? Donna Summer. I had a girlfriend in 1976. I never heard this song. And she said, you gotta listen to this song. You gotta listen to the song. It's called Love to Love You. She said, you gotta listen to it. I said, why do I have to listen to it? No, you gotta listen to it. You really gotta listen to it. And it's Love to Love You. About 13 minutes worth of it. 13. People paid money to listen to Donna Summer do 13 minutes of breathing. 13, right? Is it true? Am I right or am I wrong? Love to Love You by Donna Summer was named by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. It wasn't supposed to be a rock and roll. It's like, when I got married, we had local access to New York City. It was like the Robin Bird Show and Al Goldstein were on. I don't know if you ever heard of Robin Bird or Al Goldstein. They were purveyors of porn. And they were on public access. And this, I thought this came from public access, actually. The song generated controversy due to Summer's moans and groans. And some American and European radio stations refused to play it. But my girlfriend at the time, hey, it's on radio. I said, yeah, what am I supposed to do? I'm listening. Love to love you. I think the words are love to love you, baby. I love to love you, baby. I love to love you, baby. I think that's it, right? You know, Steve Allen, back in the 1950s, when he was doing his show, the late night show, one day he decided to read the lyrics to Beep-Bop-A-Lula. Beep-Bop-A-Lula, you're my baby. Beep-Bop-A-Lula, I don't mean baby. Same with this. Love to love you. I mean, and there's some other part of it, but it launched her career. And she became, actually, she and Gloria Gaynor were the big stars among the women. Remember Gloria Gaynor, what was the song she did? I Will Survive. I Will Survive, which came later, but those were the first two big songs of that era. Van McCoy, The Hustle, and Love to Love You, Baby. Oh, love to love you, baby. My girlfriend at the time, like, every time it was on, I was like, hey, listen, why? We're in the middle of the New Jersey Turnpike here. We're in traffic. What am I supposed to do? Margaret Thatcher becomes important in 1975 politically. In the English Conservative Party circle, she stood up against Edward Heath for the party leadership and won. It was considered a major surprise. In 1976, the Conservative Party would win the general election, and Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister, taking over from James Callaghan. Oh, it's the end of Watergate. See, I did have hair once. See, I did have hair once. It's 1982 when I decided to go visit the Watergate Hotel to see what was going on. I know it's a little late, but you know, why not? On February 1st, John Mitchell, H.R. Haldeman, and John Ehrlichman were sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for their role in the Watergate cover-up. The three were convicted by a federal jury on January 1st of conspiring to obstruct justice, paying nearly $500,000 in hush money to the Watergate burglars and lying to investigators. Meanwhile, Richard Nixon, he's in New Jersey. He's now, well, he's in California at that point. I dealt with Nixon from 1985 to 1989 or 90. He settled the baseball dispute between the owners and the umpires, and got to meet him, got to go to his office. And it was me and Gene Orza and Arthur Schack, and we get into the office, and it looks like a miniature Oval Office. It's got flags all over the place, and it's got pictures of Nixon throughout the years and all that. He's not there. The secretary says, well, go in, he'll be here in 20 minutes. You want to wait? Yeah, well, we wait. So we didn't have, in those days, if we did, it would have been a great beast. And me, Gene, and Arthur all took turns sitting at his desk, just like this. I'm not a crook. I'm not a crook. We would have taken hundreds of pictures that day in the desk, but we didn't. So anyway, so that's the end of the Watergate capers at that point. 17 former aides to Nixon were employees of his 1972 re-election campaign. Do you know what the re-election campaign actually was called? It was called CREEP. CREEP. C-R-E-E-P. Committee Re-elect the President. CREEP. True. It's a true story. CREEP. You couldn't actually ask for a nicer way of describing Richard Nixon, who was always nice to me. I gotta admit that. Anyway, so they were convicted and pled guilty to charges in the Watergate break-in and cover-up. Nixon got a pardon. Didn't bother him. He went on his way. Money woes. The unemployment rate in the United States in 1975 is 9.2%. Recession recognized by Ford. Britain's inflation rate jumps 25%. Back in the good old days, oil was $13 a barrel.
Oh, Frank.
Look,
Frank.
yeah, didn't I tell you? Look, it's wearing the same thing I am. Is it? Oh, it's wearing the same thing. Oh, isn't it so cool? Even Frank wore puka shells back in the day. Right? Look at him. Look at him. He's just, that's Frank Sinatra, right? There's an episode, I don't know how many of you ever watched Johnny Carson,
Oh, yeah.
but Carson brings up, I'm looking, it's roughly this time. Carson's got Frank on. And Carson says to Frank, he says, yeah, this came into my mind this afternoon because I knew you were going to be here. when you're romantic, or when I'm romantic, I listen to Frank Sinatra records. When you want to get romantic, who do you listen to? Frank? Huh? Oh, Jerry Vale. Jerry Vale. He lived in Montvale, New Jersey. I used to see him all the time as a kid at Louis Druggs. Jerry Vale. Yeah, I work with Julius LaRosa. WNEW. Nicest guy in the world. Nicest guy in the world. And last time I heard from somebody who knew Julie about 6 years ago, said, hey, Julie sends his regards, because I hadn't spoken to him in a long time. And I said, how's Julie? And he said, oh, he's doing great. He's with Jerry Vale. He's with me and a few others. We're all members of the this impressive club there in Palm Springs called the Romeos. I said, the Romeos? I said, yeah, the Romeos. Retired old men eating out.
That's cute.
He's wearing puka shells. That's Sinatra wearing puka shells. What's a puka shell? Well, I'll take it off here to show you what it is. I won't. She doesn't want me to take it off. Necklace made of small, round white shells. See? Worn by surfers. It caught on and was a big fad for a brief time in 1975. Hence, I have a pair of puka shells. Oh, anybody have a pet screw or a pet rock?
Yeah.
No.
We had a pet screw in my house. And my daughter was born, she's going to hate me saying this, but in 1983. And she's beginning to crawl around and, by the end of 83. And the pet screw kept falling, and it kept falling, and it was pointed edges, right? So I threw out my pet screw that I had at that point for about 7 years. But this box contains one genuine pedigree pet rock. Pet rock. I had a pet screw, pet rock. And it was that girlfriend who gave me the puka shells who gave me the pet screw. She gave me a lot of gifts. An awful lot of gifts, right? The legacy of 1975 as we wrap it up. The United States and Vietnam established relations in 1995. They're trade partners today. Gerald Ford would be defeated by Jimmy Carter in the 1976 presidential election. New York City would survive economically and thrive. Egypt is a strategic partner of Israel and is trying to broker some sort of truce right now on what's going on between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Spain's a constitutional monarchy. Jimmy Hoffa, he was never found. And he's not in the he's not in that corner of the end zone at the Netherlands. Microsoft is a massive, massive business today. The Angolan Civil War ended in 2002. It was a Cold War proxy war. Disco died by the beginning of the 1980s. There was Disco Demolition Night at Comiskey Park back in 78 or 79 in Chicago, and that kind of ended the disco craze. Margaret Thatcher became England's first woman prime minister in 1979. Squeaky Fromm, Sarah J. Moore, both released from prison. Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2026. Neither Betamax nor VHSs had long lives. The puka shells, passé by 1976. The pet rock fad ended quickly. Well, thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? The floor is yours. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had some laughs. And hope that you remember.
Yes. I'm taking those home with me.
No, you're not. Things like that attracted how many people? So anyway, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed it. Any questions or comments? I'll be here for a couple more minutes, and then I got to hit the 95 traffic going home. Anybody? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, very much.
Thank you.
Good.
She wants the hot patch.